The wind carried dust across the lonely main street as if it were trying to hide the shame of the folks who stood there, whispering behind their hands. It was the same wind that brushed against the wheels of the old chair where the paralyzed widow sat. Her yellow dress faded by the sun, and her eyes turned toward the ground to avoid the stares. In a town where everyone claimed to love neighborly ways, no one wanted to be the one standing beside her. Folks liked easy kindness, not the kind that required courage. The town looked at her as if she was a burden placed upon their shoulders, something to pity from a distance, but never touch. What none of them understood was that she carried a strength deeper than the scars life had carved into her. Her name was Rena, and once people had spoken her name with respect. Her husband had been a ranch foreman known for his steady hands and tough siren spirit. Folks admired him and admired her for standing with him. But after the fire that took his life and crushed hers, leaving her legs lifeless, everything shifted. The same people who used to greet her warmly now avoided meeting her eyes. They told themselves they were busy, that life moved on, but truth was, they feared the reminder that fate could strike anyone. And in a harsh land where survival depended on strength, they pretended she had none left. Yet Rena had a spirit that refused to break. Even as she sat in her chair under the burning sun, she carried herself with quiet pride. She tried to ignore the whispers, the pointing, the muttered rumors that no man would ever claim a woman who could not walk. She stayed silent, holding her hands together to keep them from trembling, wishing someone would see more than her broken body. But the town kept its distance. Mothers pulled their children away. Old men shook their heads. Younger men laughed under their breath. Even the preacher looked past her when walking by, as if she were a reminder that prayers did not always bring miracles. She might have endured all of it. If that were the end of the story. But life in the old American frontier had its own way of turning when least expected. That morning, a cloud of dust rose beyond the far road. People stepped out from the saloon and storehouse, staring toward the horizon. It wasn't a wagon. It wasn't soldiers. It was a lone Apache man walking steadily toward the town with the confidence of someone who feared nothing under the open sky. His presence drew every eye instantly. The land had seen conflict, and folks were taught to be cautious, but this man did not carry a rifle or blade. He carried only himself, tall, strong, and unbothered by the tension that spread through the street like wildfire. Whispers grew louder. Some stepped back. Others squared their shoulders, pretending bravery they didn't feel. His long, dark hair moved with the wind, and the firm set of his jaw made it clear he did not come seeking trouble. His name was Talon, known by some as a warrior who fought storms and men alike. There was a power in his stride, a sense of purpose that made even the hardened ranch hands stop talking. No one understood why he was coming. No one expected what happened next. Talon didn't slow his steps as he walked, right up to where Rena sat alone at the edge of the street. She lifted her eyes, startled by the shadow that fell across her. He looked down at her the way no one had looked at her in a long time, not with pity, not with fear, but with recognition, as if he saw a core inside her that others ignored. As if he understood what it meant to stand alone against the world. The crowd drew in closer. People whispered sharply. Some laughed nervously. Others stiffened. Rena felt her heart pound, unsure why this stranger was standing before her. She tried to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. The world around her faded until all she saw was him. Talon slowly reached out his hand, strong and steady. Each movement seemed deliberate, almost respectful. For a moment, no one breathed. Rena stared at that hand, unsure if she should take it or pull back, unsure if he meant kindness or something else. No one had touched her hand in so long that the simple offer left her overwhelmed. She tried to find her voice. "Why are you here?" she managed to whisper. Talon's expression did not change. His voice was low, calm, carrying the weight of someone who spoke only when he had something worth saying. "You are alone when you should not be," he said. Those words rippled through the crowd like lightning. A few men scoffed. A woman gasped. Someone muttered, "Why would he bother with her?" Another whispered, "He must be mocking her." But Talon did not glance at any of them. He kept his eyes on Rena, the faintest flicker of something strong in them. something protective, something unyielding. He moved his hand closer, giving her the choice to take it or refuse. Rena hesitated. Her mind raced with fear, confusion, and a strange warmth she didn't understand. She looked around at the people who had ignored her for months. They watched her now with cruel curiosity. Some were amused. Some were offended. None stepped forward to help her. None ever had. And then she understood something painful. They never would. Her fingers trembled as she lifted her hand and placed it into his. The warmth of his palm wrapped around hers with a gentleness she didn't expect. The crowd erupted into louder whispers. Someone laughed openly. Another pointed at them, but Talon stood firm. He squeezed her hand just enough to steady her. His voice carried through the street clearly, strong enough to silence the murmurs. "You're with me now." The entire town froze. Shock spread across every face. Rena felt the breath leave her chest. She didn't know what he meant. She didn't know what would happen next. All she knew was that everything had changed in a single heartbeat. Talon stepped slightly closer, his gaze locking with hers, as if waiting for her reaction, as if offering her a path she never imagined, as if daring the world to challenge his choice. And before she could speak, before the town could decide whether to protest or flee, a sharp voice from the back of the crowd shouted something that made Talon's expression harden instantly. The air thickened. The tension shifted, and the next moment hinted that the real trouble had only just begun. The voice that cut through the crowd came from a man with a wide hat pulled low over his eyes. He pushed through the others with a swagger that showed he believed the street belonged to him. Folks stepped aside quickly, more out of habit than respect. His name was Brant, a ranch owner who liked to remind everyone that he had more cattle, more hands, and more money than anyone within 50 miles. He glared at Talon as if the Apache's presence was a personal insult he couldn't swallow. "What claim do you think you got here?" Brant barked, jabbing a finger toward the two of them. "You walk into this town like you own it, then grab the hand of a woman who ain't yours." His words stung Rena, even though they were not meant for her alone. She felt her hand tighten around the armrest of her chair while Talon didn't move an inch. The Apache's stillness made him look even more powerful, like a storm deciding whether to break. Talon's eyes drifted to Brant, slow and steady. "You speak as if she belongs to you," he said. Brant scoffed. "She belongs to no one." "That's the point." Rena felt heat rise in her cheeks. She wanted to disappear into the dust at their feet, but Talon didn't release her hand. He stood in front of her as if he'd been standing there his whole life. Something in that small gesture made her heart beat harder. Brant spat on the ground. "You don't get to say who she's with." Then he leaned in a little, lowering his voice. "And you sure don't get to take what this town doesn't offer." A few men behind him nodded, muttering under their breath. Rena recognized their faces. Men who never offered her help, never treated her with kindness, but now acted as if she was some object being taken from their shelf. She swallowed, wishing she could stand on her own 2 feet and face them. But all she could do was grip her chair and try to keep her breath steady. Talon did not raise his voice. "She makes her own choice," he said calmly. Brant laughed, a sharp sound that bounced off the walls of the saloon. "She can't even stand, and you're claiming she has choice?" The moment twisted Rena's stomach. The cruelty of his words was not new, but hearing them spoken so boldly with so many eyes watching made her chest ache. She wanted to look away, but Talon stepped slightly in front of her, shielding her from the stare of the crowd. "You think weakness is in her legs," Talon said, "but it is in your heart." The street went silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Brant's face darkened. His hand twitched toward the knife on his belt, but one of his ranch hands grabbed his arm, shaking his head. The last thing anyone wanted was a fight with an Apache warrior in the middle of town. The folks had enough trouble without spilling blood in the street. Brant stepped back, but his eyes burned with anger. "This ain't over," he growled. Talon didn't flinch. "It is not over for you," he said. "You made it that way." Rena watched as Brant walked off, shoving anyone in his path. Some followed him, whispering about pride and foolishness. Others stayed, turning their attention back to Talon and Rena with wide eyes and unsettled expressions. This was something none of them had expected, and when people faced something they couldn't predict, they usually feared it. The streets slowly emptied, though a few stubborn watchers lingered, waiting to see what would happen next. Talon lowered his hand gently, his expression softening when he glanced at Rena's face. "You are safe," he said. She swallowed, unsure if she truly was. "Why did you do that?" she whispered. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he crouched beside her chair, bringing himself to eye level. The closeness startled her. No one had come this near to her in months, not with such calm intention. For a moment she forgot the crowd around them and focused only on him. "I saw what others refused to see," he said. "A woman with a strong spirit being treated like she is nothing. That is wrong." His words caught her off guard. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them away quickly. She didn't want him to see her break down. "You don't know me," she murmured. "I know enough," he answered simply. A small tremor ran through her chest, a mix of gratitude and fear. "People will talk," she whispered. "They already do." She let out a small breath. He was right. The town would not stay quiet about this. The whispers, the gossip, the judgment hit would spread faster than wildfire. She wasn't sure she had the strength left to face what was coming. Talon stood up again, scanning the street as if checking the shadows for danger. He looked like a man who had spent his life weighing every risk. She wondered why someone like him would bother with someone like her. "Where did you come from?" she asked softly. "Why here?" Talon turned back toward her, and for a moment, something old and heavy flickered in his eyes, as if he carried stories that weren't meant to be spoken easily. "My people once traveled near these lands," he said. "I returned because something called me back." "Something," she echoed. "Someone," he corrected. She stared at him, confused. She wanted to ask what he meant, but before she could, the sound of hurried footsteps approached. Rena turned as Lynn, one of the few townsfolk who still spoke to her on occasion, hurried over. Lynn was a young woman with a kind face, though fear now sharpened her features. "Rena, you need to get inside," she hissed, glancing at Talon nervously. "The town council is already gathering. Brant is making a storm out of what happened. They're saying Talon came here to cause trouble." Talon stepped closer. "I caused no trouble." "I know," Lynn whispered quickly, "but they won't listen. They never do. They say you've been influenced, that you don't know what you're doing." Rena's heart dropped. Even after everything, the town still saw her as less. Someone to be decided for. Someone without a voice. Talon's jaw tightened. "Who decides for her?" Lynn looked down. "The men in charge think they should." Talon glanced toward the old meeting hall, where a few shapes were already gathering near the porch. Shadows stretched across the ground, long and thin, like fingers trying to reach them. The atmosphere thickened with something dangerous. "They fear anything different," Lynn murmured. "And Brant, he won't let this go." Rena felt her breath catch. The last thing she wanted was to be the reason trouble came to Talon. The weight of everyone's judgment pressed against her again, suffocating and cold. But when she looked at Talon, he didn't seem afraid. "What should I do?" she whispered. Talon leaned slightly closer. "Speak your truth." "My truth?" she repeated. "That you are not theirs to command." She shivered. "They won't listen." "I will," he said. Lynn tugged at her sleeve. "Please, Rena, let me take you home before they do something foolish." Rena looked at the dusty road, the buildings, the gathering men, the people watching from doorways. She felt pulled between fear and something new, something steady, like the quiet strength in Talon's voice. Before she could decide, another figure stepped out from the crowd. It was old Weaver, a ranch hand with a face weathered like cracked leather. He lifted a hand toward Rena. "Don't go with the Apache," he warned. "Brant is angry enough to burn the whole town." Talon turned his head slowly toward Weaver, eyes narrowing just enough to show he had heard the threat beneath the warning. "I will not harm this town," he said, "unless they choose harm first." Weaver felt the weight of the words and stepped back. Rena's heart pounded harder. She didn't want bloodshed. She didn't want to be a spark to ignite old grudges. But she also couldn't ignore the truth she felt deep inside her chest. Talon had seen her when no one else did. He had stood for her when no one else cared to. She looked at him and whispered, "Why me?" Talon held her gaze steady. "Because your spirit called louder than your fear." The words shook something deep inside her, a place she thought had turned to ash long ago. Before she could ask what he meant, shouts erupted at the meeting hall. Someone yelled her name. Another yelled Talon's. The tension snapped tight. Lynn paled. "They're coming." A silence fell over the street again, but not the calm kind. The air felt charged, unpredictable, the kind of silence that came before a storm hit with fury. Talon placed his hand on the back of Rena's chair, steadying it as the shadows of the approaching men stretched toward them. Everything was about to change again. But this time she felt a truth rising inside her that she could no longer ignore. And as the men drew closer, their boots thudding against the ground like distant thunder, she realized there was no turning back. The men from the meeting hall walked toward them in a tight cluster. Hats low, shoulders stiff. Dust curled around their boots as if even the ground felt the weight of what was coming. At the front strode Sheriff Holt, tall and broad with a scar across his chin from some fight he never spoke about. Beside him was Elder Kane, the town preacher whose eyes rarely softened. Behind them walked Mayor Dugan, a round man who preferred peace as long as it did not cost him anything. Brant came last. His pride walked ahead of all of them. Rena felt the wooden arms of her chair under her fingers, familiar worn grooves beneath her touch. Every inch of that chair knew her weight, her fear, her hope. Talon's hand rested steady on the back of it, grounding her as the men stopped a few steps away. "Sheriff." Holt looked first at Talon and then at Rena. "We heard there's been a disturbance," he said, voice even. "This town does not take kindly to outsiders stirring trouble." Talon's gaze was calm. "I did not stir trouble. I gave respect where no one else would." Brant stepped forward before Holt could answer. "You grabbed hold of a woman under this town's care?" he snapped. "And you dared to claim her as yours." Rena's heart lurched. "No one here is taking care of me," she said quietly, surprising even herself. The words slipped out before fear could choke them. "You all walk by me every day." For a moment, no one spoke. Holt's jaw flexed as if he wanted to disagree, but could not quite find the words. Kane cleared his throat. "Widow," the preacher began, making her title sound like a burden, "we have done what we could. The town sent food when you first lost your husband. We offered prayer. But you must understand that life is hard here on the frontier. A paralyzed widow cannot carry her own load. The men are not wrong to be cautious about stepping into your life." Rena felt those words like stones. "Cautious?" she repeated, voice shaking. "Is that what you call crossing the street so you don't have to look at me?" Lynn stood behind her now, his hands resting lightly on the back of the chair beside Talon's. "She speaks the truth," Lynn said, though her voice trembled. "You all left her alone." Duggan frowned. "This isn't about feelings," he said. "This is about safety. We've had trouble with Apache war bands before. Families lost. Houses burned. We cannot afford to invite more danger." "Danger stands in front of you," Talon said quietly, nodding toward Brant. "You just call it by another name." Brant's face went red. "You have no idea who you are talking about, Savage." Weaver shifted uncomfortably at the word, his weathered hands curling at his sides. Rena caught the movement and felt a flicker of something like shame in his eyes. The old ranch hand knew more than he was saying. Holt raised a hand. "Enough," he ordered. "Names will not help us. What matters is this. Talon, you cannot just walk into town and lay claim to a woman people here have known for years. It is not our way. My people know her in another way," Talon answered. "We know the story of the man who died saving an Apache child near the river 2 winters ago. That man carried a name many here respect. He was her husband." Rena's breath caught. "You knew my husband?" she whispered. Talon nodded. "He pulled my young cousin from the water when the river ran wild. In doing so, he lost his own footing. We found him broken on the rocks, his body caught between logs. We could not save him. But I vowed that his kindness would not be forgotten. The street grew still. Rena had never heard the full story of that day. Folks had said her husband died in an accident while coming back from the far pasture. No one had mentioned an Apache child. No one had mentioned anyone being there at all. "You were there," she said, voice thin. "I was," Talon replied. "I carried a promise that if ever his family needed aid, I would give it. When I heard whispers on the wind that the widow he left behind was alone and cast aside, I came." Kane bristled. "Whispers on the wind," he muttered. "Superstitious talk." But the others did not speak. The idea that her husband had died saving a child, and that an Apache warrior had carried that memory all this time, settled over them like a weight. Brant shook his head. "Even if that story is true, it does not give you the right to take her." "I am not taking," Talon said. "I am standing where no one else has stood. That is all." Marina felt tears sting her eyes. She blinked them away, fighting to keep her voice steady. "All my life here," she said softly, "I gave what I could. I cooked for the barn raisings. I sewed for the church fairs. When my husband rode out in storms, I waited with a lamp to guide him back. After the fire, after my legs failed, I thought someone would stand beside me. But your kindness ended as soon as I needed more than a polite word." A murmur rippled through the bystanders. Some looked away. Others stared at the ground. Lynn squeezed the back of the chair. "This is not about a single widow," Brant snapped. "It is about what kind of town we are. If we let an Apache walk in and speak for one of ours, we lose our place. Today he claims her. Tomorrow he claims land. After that, who knows?" Rena realized then that Brant's anger hid something deeper. She turned her gaze to him, seeing with new eyes. Her husband had owned a stretch of good land north of town, left in her name. Brant had tried more than once to get it cheap, sending offers through others. She had refused, deciding the land would not be surrendered simply because she could not work it. "You want my land?" she said quietly. He froze. For a heartbeat, his eyes flashed with something like guilt, then hardened again. "I want this town safe," he said. "And land is wasted under someone who can't use it." Weaver shifted again, finally speaking. "That land is near Apache trails, Brant. You've been eyeing it because it links to the river bend?" Holt turned his head slowly to Ward. "Brant, is this about her safety or your herd?" Brant glared at Weaver, but the question hung heavy in the air. The real conflict was stepping into the open now. It was not just about a paralyzed widow. It was about land, power, old fear between white settlers and Apache warriors, and a promise made at a river where one man had died for another child's life. Kane tried to pull things back. "Regardless of property, Talon cannot stay. The people are uneasy. If neighboring ranches hear we welcome Apache into the heart of town, we could lose trade, support, everything." Talon's eyes narrowed slightly. "You fear the judgment of men who are not here more than the judgment of the one who died for your child?" he said. "Our child?" Duggan asked, confused. "The boy your people call Reed," Talon answered. "He was the child pulled from the river. His mother was born Apache, though she hides it. You all treat her as one of you because you pretend not to know." A few heads snapped around. Rena followed their gaze to the far side of the street, where a woman stood half hidden behind a post. She kept her hair braided tight and her eyes low, but now they were wide with terror. Rena had seen her many times, working in the laundry hut, never asking questions, always keeping quiet. Duggan swallowed hard. "That is a serious claim." "It is a true one," Talon said. "Your town has Apache blood within its own walls, yet you stand here acting as if I bring some new danger that has never crossed your line before." The tension twisted into something sharper. Old secrets, old prejudice, and new truths tangled together. Rena felt as if the entire town might split down the middle. Holt ran a hand over his jaw. "What are you asking for, Talon?" he finally said. "Tell us clear." Talon looked down at Rena, then back at the men. "I ask that you stop treating her as broken property. I ask that you honor the man who died for your child by allowing me to keep my promise to his widow. I will build a place for her on her own land, where no one decides her worth but herself. You do not have to like me. You only have to step out of the way." The words stunned Rena. A place on her own land. Away from pitying stares, away from cold shoulders. The thought both frightened and stirred her. Could she leave the only town she had ever known, even if it never truly accepted her? Brant stepped closer, furious. "You want to take her out beyond the line where law barely reaches? And then what? If something happens to her, who answers for it? Some Apache council we never see." Talon met his anger head-on. "Who answers for how you have treated her until now?" Holt opened his mouth, closed it, then looked at Rena. "What do you want?" he asked slowly. The question stopped her breath. No one had asked that in a long time. People told her what was best. People suggested what she should accept. But want was a word they rarely used around her. She looked from Holt to Lynn to Weaver to the woman hiding in the shadows, to Brant with his tight jaw and greedy eyes. Then she turned her gaze to Talon, who waited patiently, offering nothing but the steady strength of his presence. Inside her, two worlds pulled against each other: the familiar safety of the town, even with its coldness, and the wild unknown of land shared with an Apache warrior who claimed she had worth. If she chose him, she might lose whatever thin sympathy the town still held. If she chose the town, she might remain trapped in a life where no one truly saw her. Before she could speak, Ryder galloped into sight from the far road, dust rising in a long line behind the horse. The animal skidded to a stop near the meeting hall, and the rider swung down. Waving a folded paper in the air, "I got word from the land office," he called out. About the North property and the claim filed last week, Rena felt the world tilt. She had not filed any new claim. She had not signed anything. But someone had. Brant's shoulders stiffened just enough to betray him. Holt looked back at Rena, then at Talon, then at the rider holding the paper that could change everything. The wind rose again, carrying the dry scent of dust and old timber, as if the whole frontier was holding its breath, waiting to see which side of the line everyone would stand on. When the truth finally came out, the rider's words seemed to freeze the whole street in place. Even the dust drifting in the sunlight appeared to pause, so the land itself was eavesdropping on whatever truth that folded paper carried. Rena felt her heartbeat thud in her ears. The claim filed last week. Her land, her name. None of that made sense. Her hands tightened on the armrests, her knuckles pale against the worn wood. Talon's presence behind her felt like the only steady thing in a world that had suddenly tilted. Sheriff Holt motioned for the rider to bring the paper forward. "Let's see it," he said, voice low but steady. The rider nodded and handed him the document. Holt unfolded it slowly, eyes scanning the page with growing tension in his jaw. Then his gaze flicked up toward Brant. "You want to explain this?" he asked. Brant's face hardened, but his eyes shifted, just barely, like a man trying to measure how much truth he could afford. "Let me see it," he demanded. Holt didn't move. "It's your signature," he said. "And hers." A whisper moved through the gathered folks, thin and sharp like a blade of wind. Rena's breath caught. "My signature?" she asked, voice trembling. "That's impossible." Brant lifted his chin. "She must have forgotten signing," he muttered. Rena shook her head. "I didn't sign anything," then stepped closer. "She hasn't left her house except when I bring her out," she said firmly. "She couldn't have gone to the land office." Talon's voice came low and controlled. "You forged her name," Brant laughed, but the sound carried no humor. "Who would believe that? Who would take the word of an Apache over mine?" Talon didn't rise to the bait. He simply stood there, shoulders strong, eyes sharp. The kind of silence that made the truth louder than any shout. Weaver stepped forward. "Brant," he said, voice rough, "I saw one of your hired hands riding out toward the land office last week. I asked him what business he had, and he muttered something about paperwork for you." "What?" Brant's head snapped toward him. "You best watch what you're implying." Weaver didn't flinch. "I'm done watching," he replied. The tension deepened. Kane shifted uneasily. Dugan wiped sweat from his brow even though the air wasn't hot enough to justify it. Holt folded the paper neatly and tucked it under his arm. Brant, the sheriff said, voice hardening, this claim gives you full rights to the North property. It means you've pushed her off her land through fraud. Brant's eyes narrowed. And who will prove that? A crippled widow? An Apache warrior? A handful of whispers from people who can't carry their own farms. Rena's heart dropped at the sharp cruelty in his words. But Talon leaned close to her, his hand brushing gently against her shoulder in reassurance. The contact steadied her breathing. You said she couldn't use the land, Talon said, voice quiet but iron strong. But you weren't planning to let her decide that. You were taking what was hers. Brant barked a dry laugh. She didn't need it. I did. Dugan shook his head. Need doesn't grant ownership. You're forgetting something, Brant snapped. My family keeps the town supplied through winter. My herd feeds half the county. Without my land, my water, this town falls. And so you get to choose who stands and who falls? Talon asked. Brant's jaw clenched. I choose what keeps us alive. Rena swallowed hard. The truth became sharper in her mind with every passing beat. She had thought Brant avoided her because she was broken, because her legs no longer carried her weight. But now she understood. Her land was the real target. Her helplessness only made her easier to push aside. Holt stepped closer to Brant. You committed fraud, he said again, and I won't stand for that. Brant glared at him. You arrest me, and this town suffers. You arrest me, and you drive away the only lifeline we have for the hard months. Kane's voice wavered slightly. Holt, we must think carefully. Brant's ranch is larger than the rest combined. The loss of his support could be dangerous, so could letting a crime slide because the man holds power, Holt answered. The line between right and survival had never felt thinner. Rena's head spun. She could feel eyes on her from every direction. Some filled with pity, some with guilt, some with the cold calculation of people trying to figure out what costs they were willing to bear. Talon leaned down slightly. You are stronger than you know, he whispered. Speak. She wanted to. She wanted to use the voice she had quieted for too long. But fear tugged at her heart. Fear of being the cause of harm. Fear of being blamed again. The last thing she wanted was to split this town further apart, but Brant brought his anger crashing back into the moment. You think anyone will follow your lead, widow? He spat toward her. You think people will take your word over mine? You've sat in that chair for months hoping someone would look at you like you mattered. No one did. Yet now you sit there, letting an Apache speak for you, as if he's your savior. Rena's breath hitched. Talon's hand tightened against the back of her chair, steady but tense. Brant stepped forward, daring to get closer. Say the word Rena, and I'll tear that claim myself. But you stay quiet. You stay where you've been, alone, helpless, watching your days fade away. You don't belong with him. You belong here, under us, with us, where you know your place. Gasps rose through the crowd. Even the wind seemed to recoil. Talon moved faster than a blink. His body angled between her and Brant, his stance like a shield forged from fury and restraint. His expression didn't twist or break. He did not draw a weapon. He didn't need to. The raw strength in his eyes spoke louder than violence. You will not speak to her like that again, Talon said quietly. Brant's tone wavered. Or what? Or you face the consequences of dishonor. Talon answered. Kane stepped forward. This is escalating, he muttered. We need calm. All of us. But calm was slipping away like water through cupped hands. The gathered townspeople backed away a few steps, sensing a breaking point. The tension pressed on them all, thick as summer heat. Rena could feel the world tightening around her. She needed to speak, but the words came tangled in fear. She thought of her husband, of the promise he had unknowingly forged the day he saved that child. She thought of the nights she cried alone, convincing herself she was a burden. She thought of the way Talon had looked at her not with pity, but with respect. And she thought of Brant, trying to steal her last piece of independence, Her breath steadied. "I never belonged to you," she said, voice gaining strength. "Not to you, not to this town's pity. My land is mine. My life is mine. And I will not let you take either." Brant's face twisted, shock and rage mixing in his eyes. Talon's expression softened behind her.
"Oh, just enough to show he heard her courage."
Weaver gave a slow, approving nod. Lynn wiped her eyes. Duggan looked shaken. "We have to resolve this before someone gets hurt," he muttered. Brant jabbed a finger toward. "Talon, he's the reason this is happening," Norina said. "You are." The crowd murmured louder. The ground itself seemed to pulse with rising pressure. Kane lifted his hands. "We need a meeting," he said, voice urgent. "A full town council gathering tonight. No decisions now. Emotions are too high." Holt nodded. "Agreed, everyone go home. We settle this at sundown." Brant's jaw worked, but he said nothing. He turned sharply and strode off, his boots kicking up angry clouds of dust. But Rena didn't relax. The moment Brant disappeared around a corner, she felt a hollow chill. She had seen the look in his eyes just before he walked away. It wasn't the look of a man defeated. It was the look of a man planning. Talon leaned in quietly. "He will not give up," he said. She nodded. "I know." Lynn swallowed. "You should not be alone tonight." Talon looked down at her. "I will stay." The promise in his voice held weight, but danger still hung over them like a dark cloud ready to break far across the street. Near the shadows of the feed store, a figure watched them intently. Someone lurking quietly, unseen by most. Someone who slipped away the moment? Rena's eyes drifted in their direction. Holt's voice called out orders for everyone to disperse. Townsfolk began shifting away. But Rena felt her pulse thumping with warning. Something unseen was waiting. The calm before sundown was only skin deep. The real storm had not yet arrived. The sun slipped lower in the sky, turning the town golden as people prepared for the council gathering. Rena sat by the window of Lynn's small cabin, her hands folded in her lap, watching dust rise as neighbors walked toward the meeting hall. She felt both heavy and strangely light, as if a weight had shifted inside her. Talon stood outside, leaning against the porch rail, arms crossed, watching the town with quiet alertness. Even in stillness, he looked ready to defend her, and that thought calmed her heart more than she expected. Lynn knelt beside Rena, gently checking if the blanket over her legs was straight. "You don't have to go," she whispered. "You've been through enough." Rena shook her head. "This is my life, my land, my name. If I stay hidden, Brant wins without a fight." Lynn squeezed her hand. "Then I'll stay with you. You won't face them alone." Before Rena could reply, Talon stepped into the room, his steps firm and steady. "It is time," he said softly. Her heart beat faster. She gathered her breath, nodded, and Talon lifted her chair with ease, carrying her down the steps with careful hands. Outside, the evening breeze brushed her face, warm and soft like a blessing. Lynn walked beside them, and a few townsfolk paused to watch. Some looked puzzled, others curious, but none spoke. When they reached the meeting hall, a hush fell. People shifted aside to make room, though some did so reluctantly. Holt stood near the front, arms folded, eyes sharp. Kane and Duggan waited beside him, their expressions tense. Brant stood near the center, chin lifted, jaw set. A few of his ranch hands hovered behind him, uneasy but loyal. Rena felt a cold ripple move through her as his eyes met hers, filled with stubborn pride and fading control. Holt raised a hand. "We start now," he said. "Tonight, we settle what was stirred today. We discuss the forged land claim, the threat it brings to this town, and the widow's rights." A murmur swept through the room. People sat on benches or stood along the walls. The hall felt packed with fear, curiosity, and a simmering hope some didn't dare name. Holt turned to Rena. "You speak first." Rena took a steadying breath. Talon remained behind her, standing tall. Lynn rested a hand on the back of her chair. She felt their presence like two anchors keeping her firmly rooted. "I didn't want trouble," Rena began. I didn't ask for any of this. But when I lost my husband, I lost everything except my land and my will. I tried to live quietly. I tried not to burden anyone. And most of you let me believe that I was someone to avoid, someone to look past. The room shifted. A few eyes fell to the floor. Rena continued. I learned today that while I was grieving, while I was struggling, someone signed my name on a claim and tried to take the only thing I had left. I did not forget signing it. I never signed anything. She lifted her chin. And the man behind that forgery stands before all of you now. Brant stiffened. This is nothing but her word. Weaver stood up abruptly. It's not just hers, he said loudly. I saw your hand leaving town last week on your orders. You didn't say it directly, but it was clear he rode with paperwork. I knew something smelled wrong. Several ranch hands exchanged glances. One of them stepped forward. I saw him too, he admitted. Didn't know what it was about, but it wasn't the first time he sent a man riding hard without explaining. Brant's eyes darted, searching for support. But the hall grew still, as more people remembered things they had ignored, small signs they once brushed off. Talon stepped beside Rena. He used her weakness as a shield for his greed, he said. My people call this dishonor, Brant snapped. Your people don't get to define honor here. Talon faced him calmly. Then let your own people decide. Brant looked around the room, but the faces weren't the same as before. They looked older, tired of fear, tired of following a man who used them without giving back. Even Kane looked uncertain, and Dugan could barely meet Brant's eyes. Holt unfolded the paper again. The handwriting doesn't match hers, he said. I asked the writer who brought it. He said the claim was pushed in quickly. No witnesses. No questions. That alone tells us plenty. Brant opened his mouth, but Holt raised a hand. I don't need your confession. The act speaks for itself. Long, tense silence followed. Finally, Holt spoke again. We revoke this forged claim. The land remains under Rena's name. And Brant, you owe this town an apology for risking its integrity. Brant's jaw clenched. I did what I had to for survival, Holt said. You did what you had to for yourself. With that, the balance of power finally shifted. Rena felt something loosen inside her chest. Not joy, not triumph. Just relief, deep and warm. Kane stepped forward. And what of the situation between Rena and Talon? He asked carefully, as if hoping to start a safer topic. Rena glanced at Talon. His expression remained steady. But there was a gentleness in his eyes that encouraged her. She spoke softly. I choose my path, not out of fear, not out of being rescued, but because someone finally saw me, not my legs, not my weakness me. Lynn smiled, tears shining in her eyes. Talon lowered his head slightly in respect. I stand beside her, he said, but she walks her path. I do not choose for her. The hall was quiet. People whispered softly. The tension that once filled the room slowly melted into something else. Something like acceptance. Something like the beginning of understanding. Dugan scratched his head. Well, won't say it's what I expected today, he muttered. But maybe it's for the best. Kane sighed. If she wishes to live on her own land with his help, the church won't stand in her way. Holt nodded. The matter is settled then. Rena felt tears prick her eyes. Not of sadness, but of release. Talon placed a hand gently on her shoulder, his touch steady, grounding her. Brant defeated. Shoved past the crowd and stormed out of the hall. No one followed him. Outside, the night sky stretched clear and peaceful, stars forming patterns above the roofs of the small frontier town. The threat of harm had eased. The forged claim was destroyed. The whispers that once buried her were silenced. Lynn hugged her tightly. You did it, she whispered. You found your strength. Rena smiled through tears. I just needed someone to remind me I still had it. Talon knelt beside her chair. Your spirit was never broken, he said. It only needed room to breathe. Rena touched his hand. Thank you for keeping your promise. Not just to my husband, but to me, he nodded, eyes warm. The land you hold will grow with you, and you will not face it alone. In the days that followed, Rena returned to the north property with Talon's help. They cleared the broken fence lines, built a small cabin with wide windows so she could watch the sunrise, planted seeds beside the river where Talon said, "New life always found a way." Lynn visited often, bringing fresh bread and laughter. Weaver helped mend the corral posts. Even some of the townsfolk began stopping by, offering small gifts or simple greetings. Slowly, the land became more than a boundary. It became a home. Rena found strength she thought she had lost. Talon stayed by her side, steady and patient, not as a rescuer, but as someone who believed she could reshape her life. She learned how to guide her chair over uneven ground. She learned how to trade with ranchers again. She learned how to smile without forcing it, and the town, once blind to her worth, learned to look at her with new eyes. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, Talon stood beside her on the porch of their new cabin. The river shimmered softly. The breeze carried the scent of earth and growing things. "You are not alone anymore," he said. Rena reached for his hand. "I know," she whispered. She looked at the land stretching before her, the same land she once feared losing. Now it felt like the start of a new story, a story of healing, courage, and the kind of love that grew from respect, not pity. The old American frontier had never been easy, but it had taught her one truth she would carry forever. Strength was not in the body, it was in the heart and hers. Once overlooked by everyone around her, now stood proud beside the man who had vowed, "You're with me now, together." They built a life not from desperation but from hope, and the land, wild and open, welcomed them as if it had been waiting all along.